Welcome back to Velma's Stories, where real women share the moments that change their lives forever. My name is Margaret Harper. I'm 72 years old, and this is the story of how my son, his wife, and even my grandchildren forgot who I really was, until I reminded them the hard way. Before we begin, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let me take you back to the moment I realized I was no longer welcome in my own family's home. I was born and raised in a quiet suburb just outside Chicago, where the river runs slow and steady like time itself. All my life, I believed that home was more than walls or windows. It was the beating heart of a family. And for nearly 50 years, that heart was the house my husband Hurled and I built together with our own hands. Every brick we laid, every floorboard we nailed down was part of our story. The garden in the back, where lilacs and roses grew wild, was Hurled's pride. He used to say, "Maggie, when I'm gone, this house will still hold us." He was right. After his sudden death 5 years ago, the house became both my anchor and my silence. It was too big for me alone. The rooms echoed with absence. Nights were long, and even the ticking of the clock felt like company. So when my son, Evan, said, "Mom, move in with us. It'll be easier," I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think my loneliness might finally find rest in the noise of family life. At first, it felt almost right. My daughter-in-law, Mara, made a show of fresh sheets on my bed. My grandsons, Connor and Liam, carried boxes upstairs with teenage grins and silly jokes. We toasted Hurled with a glass of wine that first evening, and for a flicker of a moment, I thought, yes, maybe this is my second chapter. But comfort is a fragile thing. Within weeks, the little kindnesses began to peel away like old wallpaper. Mara removed the lavender candles I'd placed on the nightstand. She borrowed my blanket, then folded it neatly in the guest room instead of mine. My chair in the living room, Hurled's old recliner, the one that had cradled our evenings together, migrated into a corner, covered with laundry baskets. The message was subtle but unmistakable. This is not your space. I noticed it in their voices too. Mara's polite, clipped sentences. The way Connor and Liam pulled their earbuds in tighter when I spoke, as if my words were static. And Evan, my own son, said nothing at all. His silence was worse than any insult. The first time it truly cut me was over dinner. I had spent the afternoon cooking Hurled's favorite, roast chicken with lemon, rosemary, and garlic. The smell filled the house, rich and warm, like the old days. I thought maybe, just maybe, it would remind them of family. But when I carried the dish to the table, Connor wrinkled his nose. "Ugh," he muttered. "This looks like food from the 1940s. Mara didn't even look up as she said, "It's just old-fashioned." And then they laughed, all of them. My grandsons chuckling into their sleeves, Mara smirking, even Evan letting out a small laugh before looking away. I stood there, holding the serving spoon, as their voices bounced around me like cruel echoes. No one touched the chicken. They ordered takeout instead. I watched as Mara scraped my food into the trash. The lemon, the rosemary, the golden skin, all of it tossed aside like it was nothing. My hands trembled, not from age, but from something colder. Humiliation. I carried my empty plate back upstairs. The scent of garlic and herbs still lingered in the air, but now it was no longer comfort. It was mockery. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed with Hurled's photograph in my lap. His eyes, kind even in stillness, seemed to whisper the words he'd said so many times. "Maggie, people laugh at you only when you let them." I realized I had been letting them. For too long, my silence had made me invisible. The weeks that followed only confirmed what that dinner had revealed. My presence in the house was a burden they no longer bothered to hide. Mara began to sigh whenever I entered the kitchen, as though I had stepped into a place where I didn't belong. "Don't overexert yourself, Margaret," she would say, plucking the knife or spoon from my hand like I was a child. My recipes were dismissed as unhealthy or dated. Connor once joked to his younger brother, loud enough for me to hear, "It smells like a nursing home in here." Liam laughed so hard he dropped his phone. They didn't even look at me to see if I'd heard. It didn't matter. And Evan, my own flesh and blood, remained silent, always silent. One evening, I baked fresh bread, the way Harold used to love, with a crisp crust that cracked beneath the knife. I set it on the table, proud of the golden loaf, and waited for someone to break a piece. Instead, Mara wrinkled her nose. "It's rustic," she said, in the tone people use for something barely edible. Connor smirked. "Rustic? More like prehistoric." Laughter followed, not the light laughter of family, but the kind that carves lines into your heart. They ordered pizza that night, and my bread, still warm from the oven, ended up in the trash. I didn't cry where they could see me. I carried my plate into my room, closed the door, and sat in the dim light, the smell of yeast and rosemary clinging to my hands. I wanted to scream, but silence seemed safer. Silence had always been my shield. On my nightstand sat Harold's photo in its wooden frame. I touched the edge, whispering, "You wouldn't believe what they're doing, Harold. You wouldn't believe how small they've made me feel." And then I heard his voice, not in sound, but in memory. "Maggie, you only disappear when you agree to vanish." That night, instead of reaching for tissues, I reached for the drawer in my bedside table. Inside was an envelope, yellowed with time. My hands trembled as I slid it open and pulled out a folded document. The deed to the house Harold and I had built together. My house. My name, clear and firm in ink. I stared at it for a long while. They thought they were the owners of my dignity, the keepers of my silence. They thought I had nowhere else to go, nothing left to stand on. But in my hands lay proof that they were only guests who had long since worn out their welcome. For the first time in months, I felt the faint stirrings of power, not anger. Power is quieter than rage. It hums beneath your skin like a reminder. You are not done yet. I slid the deed back into the envelope and closed the drawer, pressing my palm flat against the wood. I wasn't ready to reveal it, not yet. But the moment was coming. The morning I finally left the house with that envelope tucked in my handbag, the sky was gray and heavy, as though it too carried secrets waiting to break. Mara was in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone, her coffee steaming untouched. She didn't notice me slip out the door. Connor and Liam were still asleep, their laughter from the night before echoing in my mind. Evan was already at work. I walked slowly, each step steady, the document pressing against my side like a heartbeat. My heart was pounding louder than my shoes on the sidewalk. For 72 years, I had done what was expected. I had stayed quiet, kept the peace, carried the weight of family on my shoulders. But that morning, my silence turned into resolve. The office of Mr. Grayson, my lawyer, was lined with shelves of thick books and framed diplomas. He rose when I entered, a man in his 60s with silver hair that gave him an air of both wisdom and kindness. "Mrs. Harper," he said warmly, "what can I do for you today?" I placed the envelope on his desk and slid it toward him. My hands did not tremble this time. "I want to know," I said, my voice calm, "what power this paper still holds." He opened it carefully, adjusting his glasses as his eyes moved across the faded ink. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Finally, he looked up. "Mrs. Harper," he said, "this deed is clear. The house is yours, solely yours. No one else's name appears here. Legally, you are the only owner." The words felt like oxygen flooding lungs that had been starved too long. I let out a slow breath. "So I can decide who lives there?" He nodded. "You have full authority. If you want them out, you can issue an eviction notice. 30 days is standard." Eviction. The word rang in my ears like a church bell. I imagined Mara's smirk disappearing, Connor's cruel laugh silenced, Evan finally forced to look me in the eye. Mr. Grayson leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Are you sure this is what you want to do?" I straightened in my chair. "I am not acting out of anger, Mr. Grayson. I'm acting out of necessity. They've turned me into a ghost in my own home. That ends now." His pen scratched across the paper, drawing up the notice. He slid it toward me, and I signed my name with a steady hand. Margaret Harper. Bold, clear, alive. When I stood to leave, he said softly, "Mrs. Harper, you've taken the first step back to yourself. Don't look back." I walked out of his office into the cold Chicago air, the signed papers secure in my bag. For the first time in years, the weight pressing on my chest lifted. Not gone, but lighter. And I knew, when I laid those papers on the table at home, the real battle would begin. In the next part, I'll tell you what happened the night I placed those documents in front of my family and watched their faces change forever. That evening, the house smelled faintly of takeout, sweet and greasy, the kind of food Mara ordered when she didn't want me in the kitchen. Connor and Liam sprawled on the couch with their phones glowing in their faces, while Evan sat in his armchair, his eyes fixed on the muted TV. I stood in the doorway for a moment, clutching the folder under my arm. My hands no longer trembled. There was no fear left, only clarity. I stepped forward, crossed the living room, and placed the folder squarely on the coffee table. The papers made a soft thud, but it might as well have been thunder. "Mom?" Evan looked up, startled. "What's this?" I met his eyes for the first time in weeks. "Rate it." Mara leaned forward, snatching the folder before Evan could move. She opened it and scanned the first page. Her face drained of color, then flushed red. "Eviction?" Her voice rose, sharp and furious. "You can't be serious." I stood tall, folding my hands calmly in front of me. "I'm very serious. This house is mine. Always has been. You've lived here only because I allowed it. That allowance is over." Connor pulled out one earbud, confusion creasing his face. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, my voice even, "you have 30 days to find somewhere else to live." The room erupted. Mara slammed the folder shut, her words tumbling out like venom. "You ungrateful old woman! After everything we've done for you, you want to throw us out on the street?" I didn't flinch. "Done for me? You laughed at me. You threw my cooking in the trash. You made me invisible in my own home. That's not care, Mara. That's cruelty." Evan finally spoke, his voice shaking. "Mom, please. We're family. Families stick together." I turned to him, my heart aching but firm. "Family doesn't silence you. Family doesn't let you stand alone while they mock you. Family doesn't make you feel like a ghost." His lips pressed into a thin line. He had no defense. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the buzz of Connor's phone as a message came in. I picked up the folder again, tapped it lightly, and set it back on the table. 30 days, I repeated. Not a day more. I walked to the doorway, pausing for just a moment. They were all staring at me, Mara furious, Evan pale, the boys wide-eyed. For once, I wasn't the silent shadow in the corner. For once, they had to look at me. The days after I laid those papers on the table felt like living inside a storm. Not the kind that crashes suddenly with thunder and lightning, but the long, howling kind that rattles every window and makes you wonder if the house itself will hold. It began with silence. For 2 days, no one said a word to me at all. Mara stomped past me in the hallway, slamming cabinets as she cooked. Evan kept his head down, mumbling work whenever I passed. The boys hid in their rooms, their laughter muffled behind closed doors. But silence, I knew, is only the first stage. On the third night, Mara exploded. She marched into the living room where I was reading, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You can't do this, Margaret. Do you have any idea what people will think? That you kicked out your own son? Your grandchildren? You'll be the talk of the neighborhood." I closed my book, placed it neatly on the table, and looked at her. "People will think what they always think, Mara. They'll believe the story you tell them. But I know the truth, and that's enough for me." Her eyes flashed with rage. "You're insane. A selfish, bitter old woman clinging to some dusty deed like it makes you queen of this house." I let her words wash over me. They stung, yes, but they no longer pierced. "I don't need to be queen," I said softly. "I only need to be respected. And since you've shown me none, you've left me no choice." From that night forward, the house became a battlefield. Mara muttered insults under her breath, loud enough to wound. Connor and Liam complained constantly, saying to their friends on speakerphone, "Our grandma's kicking us out. We're basically homeless." Their voices carried up the stairs, meant for me to hear. Evan. Oh, Evan. He walked around like a shadow, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the floor. Once, I caught him standing in the doorway of my room, watching me fold laundry. His lips parted like he might say something, anything, but then he turned and walked away. Each slammed door, each sharp word, was meant to weaken me, but instead, it hardened me. Every morning, I made my tea, opened the curtains, and watched the lilac bush Hurled had planted sway in the wind. That bush had survived storms before. So could I. One evening, Connor banged on my door, shouting, "You're ruining our lives. None of my friends are going to invite me over anymore because of this. Everyone thinks we're broke." I opened the door, looked him in the eye, and said, "Connor, you'll learn someday that dignity costs more than comfort, and it's always worth the price." He rolled his eyes, muttered, "Crazy old lady," and stomped off. But his words slid off me like water off stone. I had already decided, no matter how loud they got, no matter how cruel, they had 30 days, and not a day more. The final week felt heavier than all the others combined. Boxes lined the hallways now, taped and labeled in Mara's sharp handwriting. The boys stomped up and down the stairs with forced drama, sighing loud enough for me to hear. The sound of packing tape ripping became the soundtrack of the house. Mara didn't bother with politeness anymore. "Enjoy your palace, Margaret," she sneered one afternoon as she shoved a box of dishes past me. "You'll have all the space you need for your ghosts." I didn't answer. Ghosts don't scare me. Disrespect does. But Evan finally broke his silence. It was 3 days before the notice expired. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, the evening light pouring golden across the floorboards Hurled and I had laid decades ago. Evan walked in slowly, carrying no box, no phone, just the weight of his own hesitation. "Mom," he began, his voice quiet, almost pleading. "Are you sure about this?" I looked up, meeting his eyes. They were the same blue as when he was a boy, the same eyes that once looked at me with trust. Now they looked tired, searching. "Evan," I said gently, "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He pulled out a chair and sat across from me. His hands fidgeted, twisting together like a rope. "I know Mara can be sharp, and the boys, they're just kids, but we're your family. Doesn't that count for something?" I took a slow sip of tea before answering. "Family counts when it treats you like family, when it protects you, respects you, loves you." You stood silent while they laughed at me. You let them scrape my meals into the trash. You let me disappear in my own house. His lips trembled. I didn't know what to say. I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. My fingers were old and lined. His were still strong, but shaking. "You didn't need words, Evan. You needed courage. And that was the one thing you never gave me." His eyes filled with tears. For a fleeting moment, he looked like my little boy again, the one who used to run through the lilac garden, shouting for me to watch him. But then he pulled his hand back, wiping his face quickly. "I don't want to lose you, Mom," he whispered. "You already did," I said softly. "The day you chose silence over me." We sat there in heavy quiet, the clock ticking louder with every second. Finally, he stood, nodded stiffly, and left the room. His footsteps faded down the hall. I exhaled, long and steady. The ache in my chest was real, but so was the strength that held me upright. 3 days. That was all that remained. 3 days, and my house would breathe again. The 30th day arrived like the last page of a long and bitter book. I woke early, long before the sun had risen, and stood at the window in my robe, watching the yard Harold and I had once tended together. The lilac bush swayed in the dawn breeze, stubborn and steady, as though reminding me that roots matter more than noise. By mid-morning, the house was chaos. Mara barked orders as movers hauled out boxes. Connor and Liam dragged backpacks across the floor, their faces twisted with sulky resentment. Evan moved slowly, shoulders bent, his eyes never lifting to meet mine. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, calm and still, as they rushed around me. For once, I was not invisible. They had to swerve around me, glance at me, acknowledge me. "Are you happy now?" Mara spat as she shoved a box into the moving truck. Her face was red with anger, her hair sticking to her temples. "You've ruined your family. You'll die in this house alone." Her words might have cut once, but now they were dull blades against steel. I simply said, "I'll live in this house with dignity. That's more than I've had in years." Connor muttered something under his breath about crazy old woman. Liam laughed half-heartedly, but their voices already sounded far away, like echoes fading out of a room. Evan lingered the longest. He stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, the other clutching a duffel bag. His lips parted, as though he wanted to say something. Apology? Anger? Maybe both. But no words came. In the end, he turned and followed the others to the truck. I watched from the porch as the engine roared to life. The truck pulled away, carrying with it the noise, the laughter, the cruelty, and the silence that had weighed heavier than all of it. When the sound finally faded, the stillness was profound. The house stood quiet, not empty, but waiting, like it had been holding its breath for 30 long days. I stepped back inside, closed the door, and leaned against it. The air smelled different already, as though the walls themselves sighed in relief. For the first time in years, the house was mine, completely mine. When the moving truck turned the corner and the street swallowed its sound. The house settled around me like an old coat I hadn't worn in years. Familiar, a little heavy, but mine. I stood in the foyer and listened. No cabinet doors slamming, no music leaking under bedroom doors. No footsteps stomping their feelings across the floorboards Harold and I had laid with our own hands. Just the hush of late afternoon and the low river beyond the yard, moving the way rivers do, steady, indifferent, certain. I opened every window. The sash ropes creaked the same way they had when Harold first painted them in the 70s, a sound I'd once found annoying and now heard as a greeting. Cool air came in and rolled through the rooms, lifting curtains, chasing out the clinging sense of takeout and tension. The house breathed, and I breathed with it. I started with small things, because small things are how you tell a house what kind of life you mean to lead. I took the laundry baskets off Harold's recliner and set them, empty, in the hall. I smoothed the old knit throw across the chair's back and tucked the corners like I was tucking in a child. In the living room, I pulled the recliner out of the corner and returned it to its rightful place by the window, where the light is kindest in the evening, where Harold used to sit with a newspaper folded like origami in his lap. I set his reading lamp on the side table and tightened the shade. It had always leaned slightly left. In the guest room that had been called mine, but never felt like it, I put the lavender candles back on the nightstand and unfolded the blue quilt I had pieced together on the winter after Harold died. My hands moved without hurry. I wasn't undoing a mess as much as writing a new sentence on a page that had been scribbled over. The work wasn't about cleanliness, it was about ownership. Not the legal kind. Mr. Grayson had already given me those words, but the quieter kind that turns rooms back into rooms and not battlegrounds. In the kitchen, I scrubbed the counters with lemon soap until their surface shone, then stood with my palms flat on the cool laminate and let the present catch up to me. The clock over the stove ticked. Its second hand, missing a sliver of red paint, hopped forward like a bird. Time had been heavy here lately, a weight I carried for other people. Now it felt like a tool. I could use it, spend it, rest inside it. And I knew exactly how I wanted to mark its next few hours. I took out my old roasting pan, the heavy one with the warped corner from the year the boys were little, and Harold dropped it laughing because the cat had rocketed between his ankles. I ran my fingers along the dent and smiled. Small dents carry big stories. I set the pan in the sink and washed it carefully, then patted it dry and set it on the counter like an altar. From the pantry, I gathered potatoes and onions, a bottle of olive oil, the jar of coarse salt that grinds with a good, honest sound. I stepped into the yard for rosemary. The bush by the back step had outlived harsh winters that would have forgiven it for giving up. It hadn't. I pinched sprigs, and the oils opened under my fingernails, green and clean and sharp. Harold used to crush a sprig between his fingers and wave the smell under my nose. "That's home, Maggie," he'd say. He wasn't wrong. Back inside, I preheated the oven and set to work. The rhythm came back like a song your body remembers better than your mind. Peel and chop. Toss with oil. Salt until you think it's enough. Then one more whisper because potatoes are stubborn. Lay the rosemary across the top like you're signing your name. I seasoned a small chuck roast with cracked pepper and sea salt, seared it in the Dutch oven until the kitchen filled with the promise of something good, then nestled it among the potatoes and onions and slid the pan into the oven. While it cooked, I set the table for one with a care that felt almost ceremonial. I took the plate with the faded blue flowers from the cabinet and placed it in the center of the placemat. I laid out a knife and fork, not mismatched, not the extra set that had appeared when Mara moved in, but the sturdy stainless pair Harold and I had bought with S&H green stamps, back when stamps were still a currency of hope. I put a linen napkin on the left and smoothed it with my palm until it lay flat like a small field. At the very end, I lit a single candle. Not to pretend a party waited for me, not to stage a scene for other people's eyes, but to tell myself that light is allowed in an ordinary room on an ordinary night. The flame steadied, then leaned with the draft like it too was breathing. The roast took its time. Good things always do. While I waited, I walked through the house and noticed what silence lets you hear. The faint hum of the refrigerator. The limb of the lilac brushing the downspout in a wind that had picked up. The tick of the baseboard heater settling. And underneath it all, the river, low and sure. I stood at the back door and watched the water carry a ribbon of reflected sky downstream. I thought about how many days I had let carry me without choosing their direction. Not anymore. My phone buzzed on the counter. Evan. I stared at the screen and let it vibrate until it stopped, then buzz again, then quit. A message arrived. We're out. I hope you're happy. I typed and erased 3 different replies. Finally, I put the phone face down and walked away. Some things don't need words right away. Some things need quiet. When the timer chimed, I opened the oven and the kitchen filled with a heat that smelled like memory and mercy. I lifted the roast onto a cutting board and let it rest, while the potatoes crackled softly and the onions collapsed into something sweet. I sliced the meat across the grain. The knife moved easily, and the juices ran like punctuation. On my plate, I arranged a few pieces of meat, a spoonful of onions, a tumble of rosemary potatoes. I poured water into a glass and made tea because habit is its own comfort. I sat. The chair did not complain. I picked up my fork, and for the first time in far too long, I ate first. I took the first bite with my eyes closed. The rosemary sang. The onion melted. The meat held a kindness that only slow heat can give. Alone is not the same as lonely. Alone can be chosen, and in its choosing, made generous. Between bites, I looked at the photograph of Hurled I had brought to the table, propped against the salt cellar. Well, I said aloud, feeling only a little foolish. I did it. The candlelight flickered against the glass, and for a breath, I could have sworn he was leaning forward in his chair the way he used to, elbows on knees, smiling that lopsided smile that never once cut me down. I heard his voice the way a house hears voices long after they've gone. That's my Maggie. Not a shout, a benediction. I ate slowly, as if the meal were a letter I intended to read twice. When I finished, I wrapped the leftovers in the good containers, the ones that close right the first time, and slid them into the fridge. There was satisfaction in the simple math of it. Tomorrow's lunch already solved. Tomorrow's kitchen already clean. I washed my plate and set it in the rack to dry. Drops beaded along its floral edge like small clear stones. After dinner, I walked the perimeter of the house the way Hurled used to after big storms, checking for damage, not because I expected it, but because care is another word for attention. I jiggled the back door lock and made a note to have Mr. Diaz from down the block look at the sticking latch. I scribbled a list on a notepad. Call locksmith, replace porch bulb, oil squeaky hinge in hall. Not because the house demanded it, because I wanted to give it. In the living room, I sank into Hurled's recliner and clicked on the lamp. The shade threw a circle of patient light across the pages of a library book I had started months ago and abandoned when the days got loud. I didn't pick it up right away. Instead, I let my head tip back and stared at the ceiling, where a faint hairline crack ran from the crown molding to the corner, like a delicate map of how time moves through plaster. Even good houses carry lines. so do good lives. Before bed, I stepped onto the porch. The night had cooled, and the breath of the river was easy on my skin. Somewhere a dog barked, and then thought better of it. I stood there until the stars nudged their way through the haze the city throws up against the sky. I pressed my palm against the porch post Hurled and I had sanded and painted together. The grain under the paint was still there, strong. You can cover a thing to protect it and still know what's underneath. The trick is remembering. Back inside, I turned out the lights one by one. In my room, I set the alarm not because I had an appointment, but because I wanted to wake with the day, to catch that first clean hour when decisions feel like they belong to you. I sat on the edge of the bed and held Hurled's photo again. Respect isn't a gift, I said into the soft dark. It's a boundary. Today I kept mine. My phone lit up once more on the nightstand. Another message from Evan. If you want to talk? It stopped there, ellipsis blinking like a heartbeat. I didn't answer. Not tonight. There are conversations you can't have until both people understand where the door is and who owns the key. The door was finally where it belonged. I slid under the quilt and turned onto my side, facing the window. Outside, the lilac brushed the downspout again and again, steady as prayer. I closed my eyes and let the house hold me, not as a favor, not as charity, but as a rightful place. Sleep came the way peace does when you have earned it, slowly, then all at once. In the morning, I would make coffee and carry a cup to the river. I would call Mr. Diaz about the latch and the locksmith about the new keys. I would write a short letter to Evan that said only what was true and nothing that was cruel. I would bake a small loaf of bread because the smell of yeast rising is a promise I still believe in. I would take the first slice while it was warm, with butter that remembered the shape of the knife. But that was morning's work. Tonight, in a house that finally answered to my name, I let the last thought of the day be the first one I'd been afraid to hold. I am not a ghost. I am not an extra place setting. I am Margaret Harper, and this is my home. The candle on the kitchen table burned itself out in the safe glass dish, leaving a curl of smoke that rose, then disappeared. The room didn't feel empty. It felt quiet. There is a difference, and I had found it.